Hi. Today we will explain the storyline of the movie titled The Way, Way Back, which was released in 2013. Okay, let's get right to the story. Pam and her boyfriend Trent take their teenage son Duncan on a beach vacation during the summer. Duncan doesn't like Trent, and during the trip he even sits with his back to Trent in the back seat. Trent tries to talk to him and asks Duncan to rate himself on a scale of 1 to 10. Duncan rates himself a 6, but Trent boldly rates Duncan a 3, belittling him for being unsociable and only giving him a 3. Trent hoped that the score would change after they spent time together, especially since he was very optimistic that they would become a family someday. Upon arriving at Trent's usual cabin, Trent's neighbor Betty greeted them warmly. Betty had a daughter named Susanna, and Pam briefly introduced Betty to Duncan. Betty mentioned that other families who frequently vacationed at the beach would also be arriving and were ready to party together. After putting their belongings in the cabin, Trent's daughter, Steph, reluctantly invited Duncan to the beach. Trent signaled to Duncan to go with Steph because he wanted to be alone with Pam. Steph seemed uncomfortable being with Duncan. She even warned him to keep his distance. Steph then chatted with the other girls, while the shy Duncan chose to sit alone and observe the scenery. When the other girls looked pityingly at Duncan, Susanna felt sympathy but didn't want to talk to him yet. Duncan ended up walking around by himself, where he ran into Betty and her younger son Peter, who was younger than Duncan. They introduced themselves briefly until Betty suggested that they hang out together, but Duncan said he had to ask his mother's permission first. After that, Duncan returned to the cabin, then listened to music on the roof of Trent's car, singing loudly without caring about his surroundings. Without realizing it, Susanna was listening to Duncan, and Duncan suddenly felt embarrassed when he saw Susanna. Shortly after, Duncan returned to the cabin where Trent's friends, Kip and Joan, had stopped by. Duncan was forced to join them for dinner, while Steph said she had plans. Trent mentioned that his car was slightly scratched, suspecting Duncan was responsible for it, but Duncan claimed he knew nothing about it. Pam noticed that Duncan looked gloomy among them, so she allowed Duncan to leave. Duncan went to the terrace and accidentally made eye contact with Susanna. He felt awkward to start a conversation first, but Susanna broke the ice. However, they only spoke briefly, and Susanna then invited Duncan to find her later if he wanted to talk again. The next day, Duncan was left alone in the cabin. He sneaked into the garage and found a bicycle, so Duncan rode around on it. He stopped by a local restaurant to buy a drink, but he saw a ding-dong game machine and was tempted to play first. An adult man named Owen was playing the machine, and they ended up talking about the game until Owen had to leave. Duncan then took Owen's place until the game was over. Upon returning from their outing, Duncan's parents hurriedly told him to get ready because they were going to board the ship. Though reluctant to be around so many people, Duncan reluctantly agreed to go, but on the ship, he sat alone with no one to talk to. Not far from him, Pam and Trent were chatting with Betty and the others, while on the other side, Steph and Susanna were sunbathing. Pam then tried to talk to Duncan, who admitted that he didn't like seeing Trent and just wanted to go on vacation with his biological father. Pam tried to explain to Duncan that now he was with Pam and Trent, and he was trying to get more involved in Pam's life, including getting closer to Duncan. The next day, Duncan rode his bike back to the outskirts of town and decided to stop at the Whiz water park, sitting by the pool. Owen, who had played Ding Dong with him the day before, was there too. He greeted Duncan and remembered the Ding Dong game machine, but they only exchanged a brief greeting. Duncan went home and stopped briefly by the roadside to chat with Susanna. Here, they both found out that their parents had divorced, and Susanna was waiting for a call from her father. Duncan then said goodbye and promised to talk to her again. That night, Duncan sat alone by the beach, waiting for the people in his cabin to fall asleep before going back inside. Apparently, he was avoiding his mother. Trent noticed this and scolded Duncan, saying that Pam had been looking for him since noon and was worried. According to him, Duncan should have left a note before leaving. On the other hand, he also knew that Duncan couldn't accept him yet, so he reminded Duncan that they had to respect each other for their relationship to work. Duncan just nodded at Trent's words and went up to his room. No one knew where Duncan had gone, but he returned to the water park where Owen worked the next day. This time, Owen invited him to chat more casually and play one of the rides while telling him about the history of the water park's construction. There, Owen introduced him to other employees, such as Caitlin and Lewis. Owen also knew some of the boys who were customers and introduced them to Duncan. In short, Duncan had a great time at Whiz until closing time. Originally, Duncan was going to ride his bike home, but Owen offered him a ride. On the way, Owen asked why Duncan came to Water Whiz, even though he lived behind the beach. Duncan replied that he didn't like being at home. When dropping Duncan off, Owen mentioned that he needed an extra worker at Water Whiz and offered the job to Duncan, who accepted immediately. Pam saw Duncan coming home with a man and asked who his new friend was. Pam said she wanted to meet him, but Duncan replied casually. Finally, Pam just told Duncan not to go out again until nightfall without letting her know, like he had done the previous day. After that, Duncan joined the party in the cabin yard with Pam and the others. Pam then told him to get some food and eat with her. While getting food, Susanna greeted him and advised Duncan not to try the clams. However, Trent suddenly invited Pam to join Susanna's brother, Charlie. Seeing this, Duncan became disappointed and pushed his food away. Susanna then invited him to take a walk along the beach while chatting. Susanna told him about her mother and her memories with her biological father. But since Duncan remained silent, Susanna asked him to take turns telling stories. Duncan said his father had a new girlfriend who was younger, and they now lived in California. Duncan promised to visit his father there. Before returning to their cabins, Susanna asked Duncan where he had been riding his bike all this time, but he kept it a secret. Before entering the cabin, Duncan accidentally saw Trent in the dark with Joan by the cabin. Duncan hid so Trent wouldn't see him, but Pam also suspected the two of them. The next morning, Duncan came to Water Whiz to work with Owen. On his first day, Owen told Duncan to pick up a cardboard box that a group of kids were using as a platform to breakdance. But one of the kids challenged him to breakdance before picking up the box. Owen watched from afar, pleased to see Duncan blending in despite his awkwardness. Duncan himself felt happy. But once he got back to the cabin, he tried to hide his happiness from Pam. After working for a few days, Duncan became more relaxed and enjoyed his job at Water Whiz. One day, the children who often played on the water slide got stuck at the same time. Owen tried to find a solution and looked for volunteers from the line of visitors. A man agreed to go into the tube slide and push the three of them out, but Owen's solution was met with opposition from Caitlin. She scolded Owen for not following procedures. Duncan felt bad because it was the ride he was responsible for, but Owen assured him that it wasn't a big deal. The next day, Water Whiz closed due to heavy rain, leaving Duncan stuck in the cabin with Pam, Trent, and Steph. Trent suggested calling Kip and Joan. But Pam wasn't interested and instead suggested playing a board game. However, the game Pam thought would be fun ended up frustrating them because Trent tried to control the game his way. This led to an argument, and they lost interest in finishing the game. The next day, the weather was sunny again, so Duncan could go back to work. Without him knowing, Susanna followed him to Water Whiz. Duncan was happy to see Owen again even though it was a holiday, but because it had rained the day before, Duncan thought he would make it up to him today. When Water Whiz opened, Susanna invited Duncan to chat. His co-workers tried to tease Duncan and call him, but soon Owen let him take Susanna around the rides and chat. They seemed more comfortable and relaxed compared to when they were at the beach. Susanna accompanied Duncan until he finished work. As soon as they arrived at the cabin, Steph expressed her annoyance to Susanna for waiting for her all day. On the other hand, Trent's car was not in the parking lot. So Pam, Duncan, and Steph decided not to wait for Trent and to eat dinner first. In the middle of the night, Duncan suddenly woke up hearing his mother arguing with Trent. Duncan eavesdropped on their conversation. Pam sounded like she was asking Trent to be honest if he was hiding something, but Trent claimed he had been with Kip on the boat all day and lost track of time. Duncan was also disappointed in Trent and didn't speak to him the next morning. The next evening, they all had a party in the backyard. Betty and Pam quietly commented on Joan's cooking. At the party, Joan shamelessly asked Trent to dance with her. Meanwhile, Pam overheard Kip saying that his boat had been broken for a week, even though Trent had said the night before that he was on the boat with Kip. Pam realized she had been lied to. Duncan overheard the conversation and asked his mother not to run away from the problem. He asked her to talk to Trent. Trent immediately snapped at Duncan because he didn't know the real problem, but Duncan said he wanted to be with his father. Here, Trent revealed that Duncan's father no longer wanted him, while Pam had been trying to hide that secret all along. Hearing this, Duncan felt disappointed and sulked. After that, Duncan sat alone by the beach. Susanna approached him and tried to comfort him. She then told him that she had talked to her father on the phone today, but Duncan felt that being alone with Susanna wasn't a good idea right now. He ran back to the cabin but changed his mind about going inside when he saw his mother trying to resolve the issue with Trent. Finally, he ran away to Water Whiz that night, taking Peter with him. Unexpectedly, there was a farewell party for Lewis at Water Whiz, and Owen was also there. He saw Duncan looking troubled and told him to relax with him. It was a tradition there that employees who were resigning would give a farewell speech while the others would shoot them with water guns. Roddy and Duncan started the ritual, and then Owen invited the others to do the same. They had a great time dancing together. Here, Duncan and Peter could be themselves, and he was moved by Owen's romantic gestures toward Caitlin. In short, he stayed overnight at Whiz. However, the next morning, Duncan really didn't want to go home. He told Owen that he felt at home there and that it made him happy. Duncan finally confessed his feelings about Trent to Owen, admitting that he hated his mother's boyfriend. Moreover, Trent had given him a score of 3 out of 10 for his self-worth, which made Duncan angry and baffled by how Trent could be so cruel. Owen explained that it was because Trent didn't know him. He told Duncan that what Trent said was a reflection of himself. Owen's father had also had the same kind of personality as Trent. Duncan and Peter finally returned home, and Betty immediately scolded Peter for not coming home all night. Meanwhile, Trent asked Duncan to forget about last night. Duncan noticed that everyone was packing, so he approached Pam, who was also packing. Pam said that she and Duncan would be leaving with them. Duncan realized that even though summer wasn't over yet, their vacation had to end. Though disappointed to part ways with Susanna and Whiz, Duncan reluctantly goes home. As they pass by Whiz, Duncan can only gaze sadly from afar. However, when they stop at a gas station, Duncan jumps out of the car and runs toward Whiz, with Pam following him. Duncan hurries to say goodbye to Owen and rides the winding slide together. Here, Pam learned for the first time that her son had been working all along, and his photo was displayed as Employee of the Month. All the visitors gathered to cheer them on. No one had ever managed to navigate the ride as smoothly as Duncan and Owen. Before Duncan parted ways, he introduced Owen to Pam. Not only that, he also said goodbye to Caitlin, Roddy, and Lewis, who had decided not to resign after all. Duncan hugged Owen one last time, thanking him for their friendship over the years. Meanwhile, on the way home, Pam decided to sit in the back seat with Duncan, as a sign that she would always support her son.